when we look at the sheer volume of information that people have to do their job, it is too much for the mind to consume in 30 to 60 days. It's too much for them to retain over time without working at a very high stress level. So if we work from the standpoint that I'm going to teach you things, and you'll hear this all the time, like, I don't know why they screwed this up because I told them how to do it. It's like, but we don't put ourselves in their situation that you're getting told all this information that's brand new and there's no way around it. So if we change the focus from I have to teach them to I have to empower them to be successful, then that's totally different focus. We're thinking about how do we create something that they can use when I'm not there and still do this correctly, that they don't need my help.
Have you ever heard the phrase tribal knowledge? If not, then perhaps you've been fortunate in business so far. But for team leaders, for business owners, it can often be a real challenge when somebody leaves your business and takes with them all of that built up knowledge, much of which you may not be aware of, they may not even be aware of, but are those little nuggets, those small little bits of information that make your business run smoothly, that makes your team's performance and ability to do its job on a daily basis happen. And so when you suddenly lose that and you have this big knowledge gap that you haven't planned for, it can have a real negative, painful impact on your business, which is where my guest today can help. His name is Greg DeVore, and he's one of a small number of tech CEOs who has a film scoring degree from the Berklee College of Music. 20 years ago, Greg left the music industry and co-founded a tech business with his brother. And for 20 years, they bootstrapped the business until finally raising funding towards the end of last year. The company is called ScreenSteps. It has spent decades studying and improving how businesses transfer that critical knowledge between their employees and ensure that it isn't lost if the worst happens. He's also co-authored a book that details a proven and successful framework for helping employees onboard faster when they join your business, perform better throughout their time with your team, with your company, and adapt to change with less stress. It's called the Find and Follow Method, and if you listen to the end, there will be details on how you can get a copy of that book. Greg is very passionate about making even the most complex jobs feel effortless, about systemizing and optimizing and removing as much of the thinking from the scientific steps of your process as possible, thereby allowing far more brain power and capacity for the creative problem solving of the bigger tasks that every business needs to grapple with. So we're going to have a conversation about all of those things and, of course, leadership and the experiences and lessons that Greg's taken from those 20 years of running a tech business. So it's going to be a good one. Don't go anywhere. Maybe go and grab a coffee if you need one. And so let's welcome Greg to the show.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Greg, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you on the show today. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Excellent. And to kick us off then, tell the listeners a bit about yourself. What's your background? What do you do today? How did you end up doing it? What gets you out of bed in the morning? All of those kind of generic questions about your background, really.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a non-traditional background. So okay. I currently am the CEO and co-founder of ScreenSteps, and we are a knowledge operations platform. So we help businesses transfer knowledge to their employees faster, especially operational knowledge. But starting a tech startup, I don't come from a tech degree or anything like that. I graduated from the Berklee College of Music with a degree in film scoring, worked in the film music industry for a couple of years, and shifted gears and co-founded a company with my brother, and been doing that for the last 20 years now.
Wow, it must be going well then.
Well, it's going well enough that we're still going. So, part of, a big part of business, some of business is you have the companies that grow really huge, really fast. And another part is surviving long enough so that you can hit that moment of success. That 20-year overnight success story.
Yeah, but I think, there's a lot to be said for longevity as well. You look at some of the data on business survival rates. I mean, in the UK and the US, I think they're fairly similar. You look at sort of 5 years or more, and less than half of the companies survive that long. So 20 years is impressive.
Yeah. For the first 20 years, we bootstrapped the company. Mm-hmm. And, anybody who's done that knows you have to be very cautious. You're looking at that cash flow every month and making sure, and you grow organically. You're very strategic, and that was really good for us. It forced us to do a couple things. One, to really develop some discipline about being efficient, and then the other was it really forced us to really dig into the problems of our customers, because we didn't have the resources to just go spend a bunch to build something that wouldn't work, or that wouldn't make an impact for them. So that was good for us. And then in the last year, back in December, we, after 20 years, took on a small round of VC funding, because we're finally at that point where we think, okay, hey, here's an inflection point. It's time to accelerate things a bit.
What was the original kind of nugget of an idea that made you start the company 20 years ago?
Well, really, it was actually just to get to health insurance. So my oldest son was born very premature while we were on vacation. So he was under 2 pounds. I'm sorry, I don't know how many grams that would be, but he was 3.5 months premature. And I was a musician at the time. I was working in the film music industry, and they basically told me here in the US, they said, nobody's going to insure you, or your son or your wife, as long as you're you're independently employed. And so I had to get a job where there was at least 2 employees. Then at the time, they couldn't deny you health insurance, but they could charge you whatever they wanted, but they couldn't deny you. So I said, okay, if I'm going to be doing this film music thing, I'm always going to be on my own. So a strange opportunity came up. My brother was over in Paris at a conference, and some people from GE said, hey, we need some training on our ultrasound systems, our 3D 4D ultrasound systems. Would you be able to build it? And so he came back. We'd done some side projects together, and he said, hey, you want to do this? And so we formed a company. The opportunity kind of fell in our lap. And as we dug into that problem, we just saw, we'd go and see a 3D 4D ultrasound system. These things are $100,000, $200,000 systems, and they just have sticky notes all over them. So they've got sticky notes all over them because nobody knows how to use them. And they would fly people out, they'd fly everybody to New York or Milwaukee to train them all. And they'd take all these notes, they'd go home and they'd put more sticky notes on their machine. And so we really saw an opportunity there. There's got to be a better solution than the sticky note. People can't memorize, they can't learn all the information that they need to work in today's environment with the amount of complexity we deal with, the amount of change we deal with. And so that started a journey of really digging into how do we transfer knowledge to employees more quickly and help them work confidently without having to spend years on the job gaining all that tribal knowledge.
Tribal knowledge is the phrase, isn't it? And I've lost count of the number of times I've heard that from managers over the years. And it's one of the biggest threats, I think, isn't it, to a business failing even, is for whatever reason people leave and they take that knowledge with them. And if you've not captured it somewhere, whether that's in a piece of paper or a sticky note, or preferably a more advanced and reliable system such as yours, it is an important thing that I think a lot of people overlook, don't they, until it's too late.
Well, really, tribal knowledge, when we look at it, it affects the mental health of people in your business. It affects you financially, and it really affects your opportunity cost, your ability to change and adapt. So when we look at, we'll go into organizations where it will take 6 months, 12, 18 months for a new hire to get to the point where they can work independently. Well, what's happening in between that time? they don't have any confidence that they can do it on their own. I mean, think about it. Every time you have to do something, you have to go to a supervisor and ask, how do I do this? And you're constantly doing things wrong. It really creates a stressful environment for the employee. It's very stressful for the supervisors. We talk to these supervisors, and we've talked with some financial institutions here, and they're usually, mid-size. The supervisors can't even do their job. All they do all day is answer questions for other people, because it's all on people's heads. It takes too long to do that. So that creates a real stressor on the organization. The financial costs are huge. You need more people to get things done at a poorer quality when you're relying on tribal knowledge. So like we worked with one group as a medical center, and after they got out of, they shifted from this working from a tribal knowledge standpoint to a guided knowledge. They saw the productivity of their employees more than double. Well, they're scaling up very quickly, right? So now if your employee productivity more than doubles, that means that your hiring plan changes dramatically. I need, as I'm growing the company, I don't have to keep hiring as fast as I did before. I can do more with fewer employees at a lower stress level. So there's big financial impacts on that. And then finally, just the opportunity to change. When you're relying on tribal knowledge in your organization, it is very hard to change to anything, because everybody does something a little bit differently. So how do you get everybody marching a different way if they're all marching in a different direction before? So they can really, it impacts your business on so many levels.
Doubling the productivity. Feels like it's impossible to argue with that kind of result.
Well, what was funny is, so when we go into an organization, typically the tenured employees will say, well, we don't really need what you do because we already know what we're doing. And, but the science is there that when we work from checklists, when we work from guides, we are more efficient, we're more confident, we're more consistent. So in this organization, tenured employees said, okay, we don't need this. We'll just do it for the new hires. Well, the new hires were outperforming the tenured employees by more than double. They were more accurate. They were more efficient. And then the tenured employees go, oh, wait a minute. The newbies are killing us here. We're going to go. So they had the tenured employees go back through the training and adopt the system. We just have this, if you've ever read this book, The Checklist Manifesto, it's about the power of checklists. And it's written by a doctor in the Boston area. And they looked at the use in the World Health Organization and in the ERs in Boston. And the outcomes were dramatic. And these weren't stupid people. These were doctors. But when they used checklists, they got much better outcomes, but they still resisted using those checklists because it was somehow beneath them. And I think that's what we suffer a lot of in our businesses. Like there's some kind of badge of honor that I can memorize all this information instead of just admitting, hey, my mind's imperfect. If I use a digital guide, a checklist, a decision tree, whatever it is, I'm going to work better and serve my business and my customers better.
Do you think there's an aspect as well of almost seeing it as a threat to their jobs? Like, it's my job to know this. The knowledge is in my head. If I give it away, then maybe the company doesn't need me anymore.
Definitely with that. You'll have people that really fear that. And so they kind of view it as, if I keep that, then I have job security. But what's really happening is they become a liability for the business. They are hurting. They're not helping the business grow because they become that knowledge bottleneck. But also, if we've talked to people like they want to leave, but they can't. Like they just feel like they can't leave because people are just going to be calling them, or, heaven forbid that something happens to them, the business is really at risk. And so we try to help them see that your real value is the business isn't going to stop changing. It's not like you're going to write down everything you know and then that's it. Like it's written in stone tablets and now they don't need you anymore. If you become that person that can empower everyone else to be more productive and you keep learning and keep empowering, now you're super valuable to the business. You're not a knowledge bottleneck. You're a knowledge amplifier for the organization. So we try to help them see that they are your most valuable people. And if they'll change their mindset, they can become even more valuable.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to look at it, isn't it? And as well as that, I mean, thinking with the doctor example as well, they said they're not stupid people, this very high knowledge kind of role. Like having that kind of the checklist for the routine aspects of their job, what you're actually doing is freeing up the mental capacity, that intellect to focus on something else, something perhaps more important than what order do I do these things in for this basic part of my role?
Yeah. They, if you've ever read the book, it's called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. It talks about kind of two systems in our brain. And, that first system, you think of the checklist, we don't even have to think about what we're doing. I just kind of go through the process, and then I can be more present for if I'm talking with a customer or a colleague, I can be doing this work, but still be present. Where if I'm having to work from memory, they show, like our heart rate goes up, our eyes dilate. We're more stressed in what we're doing because we're having to focus. We forget things that we don't even know that we forgot. That's the real danger, is we think we know a process, but we leave a step out. And so we become less efficient, even though we think that we're working faster. And even I've been doing this for years, and I follow this. I have a procedure for something in our business. It's got a lot of steps in it. And I have a guide that comes up that I go through. And then I remember a couple months ago, I'm like, I know this, I can do this on my own. And I timed myself. It took me longer to do it. Didn't matter how many times I'd done it. It took me longer to do it when I didn't use that guide. So we lie to ourselves, and but if we get some data in there, it paints a clearer picture.
Yeah, I suppose the flip side of that, as well as with the tribal knowledge, there might be a lot of things that people don't realize they know.
Yeah.
And if they don't know, then how can you, as the business owner, know until they've left? And yeah, you've got that problem of a sudden knowledge gap that you could in no way have prepared for.
Yeah, no, it's a huge thing. So we have a framework. So, my brother and I, we co-wrote a book called Find and Follow, Reduce Supervisor Burnout and Increase Employee Performance by Transferring Knowledge Faster. And it lays out a framework for how you transfer this knowledge. And what you just hit on there is a key thing. People don't know what they don't know. And so you talk to a supervisor like, yeah, everybody knows how to do this. And I kind of understand how to do the job. The very first thing that we do is we take them through a workshop where we're analyzing, for a specific role, what are all the questions they need to answer, the tasks they need to perform, and the problems that they need to solve. And like, for example, we just did this with some credit unions. And for that member services role, there's over 500 things they have to do. And this was so eye-opening for them because they couldn't figure out, why did it take so long to train someone in this role? They'd never sat down and really done that analysis. Now, if I tell you, you've got to learn 500 things, there's no chance. I know you've got to have things to reference. But if I just say, you need to do these things on the job, then I might think, you can just watch, Bob over here and see what he does and you'll figure it out. So getting that clarity through the workshop gives you that crystal clear picture of, hey, if somebody's going to work independently in this role, this is all that they need to know. And you need that. When we do it with organizations, we've never had someone that had more than 50% of that role documented, written down somewhere. So always at least 50% of that role was relying on tribal knowledge, and usually more, it was like 75% that they were doing.
Wow. That is an interesting statistic as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Very eye-opening when you go through it, because you realize there's always been, between training and documentation and operations, there's a huge disconnect. So somebody goes into training, they come out of training, and they can't actually do anything. So it's almost like training starts once you leave training. Training gives you the background, but you get on the job and now you're going to shadow someone and learn from them. And operations saying, well, training doesn't teach them what we need to do. And training is saying to operations, well, you won't tell us what they need because operation can't really articulate it. Mm-hmm. When you go through this process, it's like you create a contract. You say, operations saying, if they can do all this when they leave training, we're going to be thrilled. They'll be able to work. And training says, okay, now we know exactly what they need to do. And so we can get synced up on what we're doing here.
There is a natural, I think, tension there between the theory and the practice as well. So I think, there's only so much that training can teach you, even on the job training, which is not something I'm generally a fan of, if I'm honest. Yeah. But, you've got to be able to have the practical aspect as well.
You do. And so what we do is, in our framework, it's really a different focus. We are assuming that they will forget everything they're taught in training and setting them up to succeed when they do. So training in our framework is, we go through this analysis and then we separate out what we call actionable and foundational knowledge. So actionable knowledge are all the things I'm going to have to do, or the facts that I'm going to have at my fingertips. Foundational knowledge is the background information I need or understanding of the context I'm working in, the tools I use, the people I'm going to interact with, the big picture stuff. And so you'll go through a short course on foundational knowledge, which might be, okay, hey, you're working at this organization. This is what we do. These are the clients we serve. And then you'll jump right in. So you do 15 to 20 minutes of that. You're going to jump right into a practice activity. So if we were at a Credit Union saying someone wants to sign up for a debit card, how would you do that? Well, they're going to go into our system screen steps. They're going to say how to sign up for a debit card. And it's going to bring that up. And they're going to have a guide that's going to be, we call findable, followable, scannable. So they can find it in 5 seconds. They can follow it without asking a supervisor or trainer for help. And they can scan it, meaning they could interact with a customer, but still be following it. They're not having to stop and read big chunks of text. And they're going to practice that scenario. And they say, well, now they're signing up for a debit card, but they don't have a driver's license. Or now so we give them all the variations on that. And the guide is going to handle all those variations. So what they're doing is they're practicing using a GPS instead of memorizing a map. And they just keep practicing that. And then they get to a point that they're very confident that they can handle this. They realize it's going to be the same thing they're going to use on the job. So they're not having to memorize mountains of information, and they onboard much more quickly. And they're better prepared to adapt to change, because if the procedure changes, we just update the procedure. We don't have to retrain everyone. They're going to adapt. Just like, Google Maps, it reroutes you around, some construction. You adapt to the new turn by turn directions very easily, instead of having to go pull out your paper map and refigure out a route.
I like that analogy as well. It's a good one.
So a totally different way of training and a different focus, where we focus not on, hey, how much can they pass a test at the end? Doesn't matter. They're getting, we all know we pass a test and a week later we don't remember half of what was on there. It's, can you do the job with the tools that we've given you to empower you to be successful?
Absolutely. Yeah. Not a fan of tests either, especially at school. You just get to the point, don't you, after a generation or two, where you're not being taught what you need to know. You're being taught to pass the test.
Exactly.
Which is very rarely the same thing in my experience anyway. But
we found very low correlation between people who pass a test after training and are able to do their job independently. Like the two don't equate. It's comforting if we're running a training class. Okay, we can show we did something, right? That they learned something theoretically. But really the goal in the work is, can they do the job confidently and independently? And so we say that's the ultimate test. Any other test besides that doesn't really matter. It's how they perform and those quality scores while they're on the job.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to look at it, isn't it? So we might have already answered this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway, just in case. What are some of the biggest assumptions about training, particularly in training employees, that most organizations will get wrong?
Really, it's that the goal is for them to learn everything. When we look at the sheer volume of information that people have to do their job, it is too much for the mind to consume in 30 to 60 days. It's too much for them to retain over time without working at a very high stress level. So if we work from the standpoint that I'm going to teach you things, and you'll hear this all the time, like, I don't know why they screwed this up, because I told them how to do it. It's like, and we don't put ourselves in their situation that you're getting told all this information that's brand new and there's no way around it. So if we change the focus from I have to teach them to I have to empower them to be successful, then that's totally different focus. We're thinking about how do we create something that they can use when I'm not there and still do this correctly, that they don't need my help.
That's a good one. I wouldn't have guessed that, actually. I would have guessed something around the tests again, I suppose, but interesting. And we've talked already about some of the financial costs and the productivity costs to a business when they rely on that tribal knowledge and they don't have an effective way of capturing it. Are there any other things to mention? I mean, we touched a bit on the mental aspects as well.
Well, I'll give you an example of a client of ours, medical device manufacturer. So they have to troubleshoot these devices over the phone. It can be a stressful situation when this device isn't working. It's in somebody's home. They have to troubleshoot that. It's very difficult. If they don't diagnose the problem correctly, they have to swap the machine out. And you can imagine that's a very expensive process. So they have to ship a new one out right away and take the other one back, only to get it in the factory and find out there's nothing wrong with this. It just wasn't, they didn't diagnose the problem correctly. So when they went in, they had a standard operating procedure for troubleshooting these things, but it was in this giant PDF file and all this text. So nobody really followed it. They all had their own way of doing it. And they didn't really discover that until they went through this workshop. They said, okay, how do we do this? And they had, 10 different ways of doing it. Once they put in these digital guides, everybody started following the same exact protocol for diagnosing the problem with the machine or troubleshooting it. And they were then able to optimize it. So if they notice, hey, wait a minute, we missed something here, we can optimize the procedure and everybody adapt to it. Well, with that, and then some other changes they made, they saved $2.5 million in machines not being shipped back anymore. And so, and just being much more efficient in that process. And the key insight there is you can't optimize until you can standardize. I can't optimize my team until they've standardized on a way of doing things. And once they've standardized, now I can see the defects in our process and I can optimize that process. And so it's a financial cost just beyond the productivity of the employees. It can impact a lot of different areas of the business.
And how do you, let's say we've got those 10 different ways of doing it at that stage, how do you then decide which of those 10 becomes the system?
It is a process of negotiation. So it's actually, when we're working with organizations, this is the biggest thing that slows down the implementation, is they find out they have not decided the one way, to do things. So they have to go through a process of reconciliation and realize, while maybe all 6 ways work, which they don't usually all work efficiently, but if they all work, the employees need one. If you've ever asked directions to someone and they say, oh, you could go down this way, or you could go down that way and go down this way. You're like, I just want to get there. Just tell me one way. I don't, I just tell me how to get there. And that's what a new employee wants. Maybe later on they'll learn, the other options that go there, but they need to decide, what's our single source of truth? What's the way we're going to standardize on? And there can be a bit of negotiation that goes on there, but it's a process the business needs to go to. They just haven't done it yet because they haven't gone through this exercise.
Interesting. I wonder if negotiation is a polite way of putting it, but yeah.
So Jonathan, the co-author, my brother on the book, he coaches our clients, and he actually has a background in as a therapist, and so he'll do a lot of kind of talking people through of conflict resolution to help get to the point that we've got that standardized single source of truth.
That sounds like a pretty useful skill set to have, actually, for what you guys do. Yeah, definitely. 20 years of bootstrapping and then going out for VC investment. How did you go about doing that? I think that's probably quite an unusual situation to be in, because most companies who are going for that kind of funding will be startups, so maybe a year or two old at most.
Yeah.
So how do you go about doing that at that stage of a business's life?
So we weren't really looking for VC investment. We were the type of business, we've been doing training, knowledge transfer for 20 years, and it's been a part of the world that's really been ignored. But since COVID, there's a lot more interest, right? It really shone a light on businesses of how inefficient they were. So we get calls all the time from VCs and from private equities, like, we want to invest with you, but they look at us and we're a little bit different. We're slower, we're more deliberate. We're not trying to just kind of like go super fast. And so we weren't really looking for VC. We thought that was going to take us on a journey that we didn't really want to go on. We didn't think would be best for us or best for our customers. But my nephew had a friend of mine from my childhood had invested in a startup that my nephew had done. And so he suggested I speak with him and just get some advice, and started talking to him. And over months, it kind of came to the point. He says, hey, what if we invested with you? And he was taking a very different approach. We were aligned on kind of the pace we wanted to go at, the impact we wanted to make. And so it was the right investor, the right amount of investment, the right time. And so we took it, and it's been great accelerator for the business, and brought some, just another great partner to the business to help us, grow the impact.
Fair enough then. Yeah, I mean, I think that the key there is doing it in a way that it makes sense for you and for your customers.
You don't want to be in a place where you have to get it or your business is going to die. Then you really don't have a lot of options. But also you want to be clear on what you want to accomplish. So are you finding the right partner there? When you have those two things in place, then you can have options where, you also don't want to put yourself, you see this, you're seeing lots of tech layoffs where the businesses have designed their business so that they can run this far. And then if they don't get another big round, the business is going to end. And we didn't want to put ourselves in that position either, but be more deliberate about our growth. So different way of doing it. I'm sure there's plenty of examples of companies that have done it other ways, have been very successful, but this is the path we've chosen.
Yeah, it is a different way of doing it, but I feel like it's a better way of doing it, or at least a more sustainable way of doing it in terms of the business and its longevity. Because you're right, I think there's so many of those tech companies, and you're always seeing them in the headlines, aren't you? About they've missed that last round that they needed for the next 5 years, and so half the staff are getting laid off, and it can be quite turbulent. And I think if you build that dependency on external funding, I mean, there's a big question mark there as well in terms of if you're that dependent on other people's money who aren't your customers, is what you're building and selling actually worth doing?
Yeah. Well, and what it forced us to do, when we had, there was a point, there's three of us, we're building this tech product, and, one of them didn't even know how to code. Right. And so we're building this product. We found we couldn't solve our customers' problems with technology solutions at the beginning. So we had to really dig into the cultural aspect of their problems. And it forced us to understand the problem at a totally different level than if we just kept kind of building stuff. And we found that there wasn't a quick and easy tech fix for this problem because there's it was just everything was misaligned in the business to transfer knowledge in this way. And that's what really forced us to build this framework. And now, we've got the resources to fill in that framework with the technology to support it. And it's really exciting to see what our customers are doing. But without having to go in and really dig into that problem, if we'd just been able to kind of create tech and do what our customers were asking us to do, we would have gone down a path that I think would have really limited our success in the long run.
That's another interesting point that you've hit on there as well, is sometimes technology isn't the solution. And again, I think there's so many tech companies out there, obviously, that it's kind of a requirement for them to say tech is the solution because they are a tech company, but they're trying to somehow force that solution into a problem where it probably doesn't need it sometimes. And then that is why it doesn't work, funnily enough.
Yeah, it's either that or the technology is good, but we have behaviors around technology that we have to use technology in the right way. And if I take a tool and I don't change the behaviors in my organization, I mean, you see this all the time. We actually work with a lot of organizations that they buy technology that they don't use. It's because they haven't really decided how they're going to use it, how people should use it, and what, they're not using the right framework for it. So they'll bring us in to help them do that change management, because a lot of it is knowledge transfer. I roll out this CRM. Nobody knows how to use it. You don't get any adoption. And everybody says, well, we need a better CRM. We worked with one group. They were on their third CRM implementation. So they've had 2 failed implementations. And a lot of it's just people hadn't been trained to do it. And so they've used this find and follow method, and they had 99% adoption by launch date because you've just clarified, this is how I do my job with this new tool there. So technology is a fantastic tool, but there's a behavior side to every piece of technology that we use that we have to figure out if we're going to get the most out of it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's too easy to try and skip that step, isn't it? And go straight to the technology will solve the issue.
Yeah.
But if you don't, as you say, if you've not understood the human aspect of it first, if you haven't systemized it, then you can't optimize it with the technology yet.
Yeah.
Interestingly. Another question for you about that 20-year bootstrapping period then. What would you say is the most valuable lesson that you learned during those years, and how does that impact what you do today?
I think it really was that there, for complicated problems, there aren't quick fixes. And it's very easy to say, oh, I can see what we can do to solve that. And until you look at the big picture, so the journey we went on is, hey, if they just have a help article for this, it's going to be fine. Like, this will solve the problem, right? And then we found it didn't solve the problem because people wouldn't use the help article, or they bring it up and they wouldn't understand it. Say, okay, well, if we just make it so that, it's very deliberate in its instructions, so it's just super simple to follow, that will solve the problem. Well, that didn't solve the problem. Yes, they could follow it, but it was kind of a new way of doing things. And so then we said, oh, now we understand we need to teach them to use these. We need to teach them to use the GPS. And once they can use the GPS, they can do that. Oh, well, wait a minute. We found out they didn't have the background knowledge they need. So at each point, you had to kind of get it to a point where you got stuck and say, okay, what's the root cause here? And I think that's what I've really learned is get to a point where you're stuck and then say, okay, what's the root cause? Solve that and then move on. And then eventually you'll get to that complete solution.
It makes sense to me. But yeah, it's kind of, it reminds me as well about a lot of the conversations I've had about innovation processes as well. And it's very similar. Some of the language is different, but it's the similar principle, isn't it? You go until you hit the brick wall, and then you've got to find out a way over it or around it or under it.
Yep. Well, and the other thing is really reframing the problem. When you have a problem, if you'll stop and reframe it, because, everybody was always pushing us in the early days to fix the training problem. We're like, okay, well, is this even possible to fix? Can people possibly memorize this much information? If we reframe it as a knowledge transfer problem, meaning I don't have to memorize it, I just have to have access to it when I need it. Now we come up with a totally different solution. And that's a lot of what innovation is reframing the problem you're trying to solve. Because when you reframe that problem, you come up with totally novel solutions.
I think the timing of it is interesting as well. Over sort of the last 20 years, and as we've seen the shift of the economy towards what people, there's buzz phrases on there like the knowledge economy and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And going on that journey alongside that development as well, and all of the technological changes that have happened with the internet and social media and personal computing, handheld device, all of that stuff at the same time. It must have been a very interesting period to be doing what you were doing.
Yeah. Well, you look at the way people learn has totally changed. So, when I was in school, you sit in a classroom and they tell you, if I want to know anything, I have to go find someone and they have to tell me how to do it. And then, my kids, they don't want someone to tell them how to do it. They're going to Google it. They're going to look up a YouTube video or a recipe or whatever it is. And so we're used to, in our normal lives, if I want to know something, I Google it, there's an answer. I have a question, there's an answer, I follow it. And then we come into work, and the way I learn is I go and ask, Jill, how do I do this? And she talks me through it. And I try to go back to my place and remember it, or I hop on a Teams or Zoom call and somebody shows me where to click. And that's totally different than how I do it outside of it. And so we're trying to bring that internal Google into the organization and help people learn inside the organization the same way that they do outside in their normal life.
Oh, it's a good point. It's aligning with the way people would learn if they weren't at work.
Yeah.
And that is interesting. I think it depends as well, maybe on the type of job. So something with some of the customers you're working with where there's literal machinery they've got to work that they're never going to have anywhere else is probably a very different problem to, say, I don't want to be mean to any industries, but let's say IT support, for example, where you literally can just Google the answer most of the time.
Yeah. And for every job, there is a portion of it that is art and a portion that is science. So science is anything we've systematized, and art is anything where I really just have to use my experience or my creativity to do that. And the goal isn't to eliminate the art side of it. The goal is to create as much science around that so that I can really thrive in that portion that's art. If everything about the job is art, everything, meaning everything is just like I got to understand everything to do anything, that's exhausting. And that doesn't create the place for actually real creativity and innovation, where if I can standardize as much as possible, I free up mental bandwidth. So in those spaces, I'm much more valuable and productive.
Which is a very interesting point of view, I have to say as well, given your music background.
Yeah.
And that's very artistic, obviously. But then I suppose a lot of instruments, there's a system involved as well. So maybe it does make sense.
Well, you think about jazz music, right? People think everybody's just kind of improvising. No, there's a structure there. There's a structure that helps those musicians improvise and work together. If I'm in an orchestra, like we all work from sheet music. That is what helps us be consistent. So you can have both sides. You can have the more improvisational jazz. There's still a structure there that helps there. There's background knowledge that people have to come to that. You go into another place and you've got these things that structure creates the environment for the creativity. If you don't have any of that structure, you just have chaos, which is what, your child's music practice may sound like. So.
I was going to say, which to the outside observer, some jazz may appear to be chaos. Yeah.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
Yeah. So last question I'm going to ask about the business, which might be a bit of a cheeky question, but I'm curious. Yeah. It's a family business, effectively, isn't it? You and your brother. What's it like working with your brother? Because I can't imagine trying to work with mine.
And so it's actually, we're three brothers now. So the two of us co-founded it. And then my other brother was working at PwC, and we were able to convince him to leave that and come into the company. So there's three of us in the business. There's actually, I'm oldest of 7 kids, so there's still even more, but we haven't hired them. They don't want to work with us. But it's actually been fantastic. We disagree. We discuss things, but we've got a working relationship where we can disagree. It's never personal. We're always trying to find the best solution. And it's really just been, I know, lots of people say that I could never do this, but it's been a fantastic experience. I consider myself very lucky to be able to work with two of my brothers in this. And it's been exciting and challenging. And, but when it's hard, it's hard for us together, and we support each other through that. And when there's successes, we can celebrate those together.
Well, that's nice to hear. Would you say that it's made your relationship outside of work stronger, or?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you don't go through 20 years of working with someone, and when you're bootstrapping a business, it is not an easy thing. Like, this is definitely not an easy path. So you don't go through 20 years of doing that without really becoming closer. I can think of a rough part of the business, things were really stressful. And we just said, okay, today on call, we're just going to get up and offer encouragement to each other. And, we're all very religious. And so we kind of turned to some scriptures of that. And that would, that we just left that so lifted up. And so, okay, we can meet this challenge. We can overcome this challenge. And so having that environment where, yes, you can disagree. You can say, hey, no, I think we should do this, or, you haven't thought of that, and you can speak plainly, but you're doing so with a background of love and respect, so that that there's nothing personal here. We're trying to get the best solution that's going to be the best one for all of us.
I suppose if it's family as well, it's harder to kind of get fed up with the business and throw your toys out and leave because you still got to see them at your mum's house or something next week. Yeah.
We got that out of our blood when we were little. I mean, when we were little, we used to beat the tar out of each other, but we got that all out of our system.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, let's talk a bit about leadership then. So first question I have for you about this one is, what would you say is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned from your whole career so far?
It's kind of about delegation, but really, a leader sometimes is tempted to just kind of delegate tasks. And I've seen, I love the book Multipliers. It's really about this principle, but instead delegating outcomes. And what I mean by that is you sit down with someone and say, hey, I need you to achieve this. And there's some guidelines about how, there's some rules about how to do that, but I'm really going to leave it up to you to figure out how to do this. Where I think early on, I would say, okay, I got to figure out exactly how they're going to do this, and I'm going to delegate every little task of this. And what that does is it kind of limits the creativity of the person, and it puts a lot more pressure on you as a leader, where as a leader, you want to figure out, where do we need to go? Let's define the direction. Yeah, maybe we need to define some parameters, but then let people figure out how to get there. And that's when you'll really see wonderful things happen in the business. So delegating that outcome versus delegating a task has really been a key thing for me.
I think that's a really good way of describing it as well, because I agree with you. I think just delegating work, to me, that's kind of the top of the slippery slope to micromanagement.
Yep.
But also, if all you're doing there is just deciding the tasks and all of that, you're kind of robbing your people of creativity, as you say, but also their autonomy, their sense of ownership over the work, their empowerment even in their job.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then they don't want to work as hard or as long or give it necessarily their best ideas, their best efforts. So I really like that idea of delegating the outcome instead. Here's what what we need to achieve, not we.
Yeah.
It's up to you how we get there. Let me know if you want any help with anything. And I really like that approach. And I've also found it works a lot better.
And there's a balance, right, too. Like there's one end where you just say, okay, you got to go do this, and you don't offer the right support, and they're drowning. And so you got to figure out that balance of how much support. I love in multipliers, it talks about like, I want 49% voting rights on this, meaning I'm leaving the decision up to you, but I want you to consult with me and give you input. But ultimately, I'm going to leave the decision up to you of how to go about this. And so it's figuring out, how do I strike that right balance of providing the right support that they need, but also this space for them to use their creativity and their intelligence. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's walking the tightrope, isn't it? What do you think is the mistake that leaders are most likely to make?
I think, well, it is. It's providing all the answers. So I served a 2-year mission for my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in Spain 30 years ago. And I was, when you're doing that, you're really on your own for like, you have, we have a companion that we're with that will change every couple months, but you have someone there that's called a mission president, who's kind of you've got all these 19, 20-year-old kids, and he's kind of overseeing, around 150 of them. And I remember going and meeting with him. We'd have, interviews every couple months, and I had this just trying to figure something out. I had a problem, and I thought he's going to just drop me this pearl of wisdom of, here's how you solve it. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? It's going to be really interesting to see how you figure out the answer to that. And I left and I was like, that was worthless. It was the best answer I could have received. It forced me to kind of dig in and really figure some things out on my own. And I'm sure he could have given me a very useful, wise, and he could have given me the answer, but he didn't. And it caused me to grow in just such important ways. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is we provide the answers too quickly. And when we do that, we maybe limit the discovery. And that may say strange where I'm talking about tribal knowledge. So I separate out, hey, here's procedural stuff. Like it's not worth knowing, like being creative in the procedures. That's not where the creativity is. The creativity is in solving those higher level problems. And that's where, I think sometimes we jump in too quickly with the answers.
Yes. And it's quite impressive seeing leaders who are able to do it in that way, because it's so easy to just say, I know the answer, here it is. And it's so good for your own ego as well. It's like, oh, look, I'm showing my knowledge, or I'm getting a bit of extra respect because I've proven that I know my stuff. But holding your tongue, it can be so difficult. And I think that's why it's so important in a lot of ways for leaders to be able to do that.
Well, there's always the risk that when they come up with their own answer, it may be a crazy answer. So there's that risk there, but that's how people grow. That's how people grow.
Yeah, definitely. It does. It takes a lot of courage. It takes trust in your people as well. It's all of those really important leadership behaviors tied up in that one quite small little problem, really, isn't it? But yeah, it is an interesting one. Tell us your best piece of advice for a first-time leader.
I think the best piece of advice is if you stay focused on the problem, like the key problem and the root cause of that problem, you're going to eventually figure it out. Like if you can not get distracted by all the other things that aren't kind of the real problem, but stay focused on that. Obviously, you have to set up an environment where you can keep playing the game. It's kind of like there's a puzzle that you have to figure out when you have a problem. You've got to make sure you've got the things in place that's going to allow you to play the game until you solve the puzzle. If you, this can get into like, if you've taken on all this funding and you've set up an infrastructure where you only have 12 months to figure it out, well, you may have to end the game before you've really solved the puzzle. But if you can set up that environment where you can stay focused on a problem and really identify that root cause and keep trying at it, you'll eventually get there. That would be my advice is set up the environment where you're going to have the time to figure out the problem.
It's a good piece of advice. And again, it plays into a lot of the big challenges that leaders face is that there's so many different problems that they're faced with all the time. And so being able to identify the key one and then have the kind of, I suppose, presence of mind almost to be able to just put that focus on it until it's solved and have the confidence to put aside the other things and all the other demands on your attention. Yeah. It's another one of those things, isn't it? Like we were just talking about, how it's really difficult. And that's probably why it's such a common struggle, isn't it, for so many leaders?
I heard a great analogy that somebody said, like, growing a business is like there's a forest fire, and it's your job to figure out which part of the fire you try to put out first. You can't put out all the fires, and so it's which one you're going to do first. And that's the key thing, is figuring that out, because there's always going to be more problems to solve than you have bandwidth or resources to solve.
I like the spinning plates one as well.
Yeah.
It's like you're spinning the plates, but you can only see the underside of the plate. And only one of them's got the dinner on it, and you don't know which one. And you got it.
Yeah. You don't want it to end up on the floor.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, if you could start your career over again, would you do anything differently?
I think I would seek out more mentorship earlier on. We kind of fell into this, hadn't worked at a company before and seen what they did right or what they did wrong. I really had no background in starting a business. And I think seeking out a really good mentor early on would have just saved us from some mistakes, along the way. And not that, the mistakes were horrible. They help you learn, but a good mentor can really just, I've seen how that can impact. And so I would do that much earlier on.
That's a good one. Definitely. I agree with you. I'm all for learning from my mistakes, but if I can learn from someone else who's already made that mistake and then avoid doing it myself, I'd prefer that, if I'm honest.
Yeah. A lot cheaper, a lot faster.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Leadership Heroes.
I've only got one question left for you. It's one of my favorites. It's called Leadership Heroes. So the question is, if you had to pick one person, and they could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
So I think for me, it would be Abraham Lincoln. When I look at what he came into, the challenge that he came into, but then how he was so willing to suppress his ego, to bring in people to help him who had really talked awfully about him, were political enemies, but he saw something in them that could benefit the mission he had, and brought them in and was able to get them to work together. I just think it's remarkable what he accomplished, the way he accomplished it in the environment that he was thrust into. To me, I love the book. There's a book called The Team of Rivals about him, and I think it's just a fascinating book to see how he led and really led without letting his ego get in the way.
It's not the first time he's been picked, and he is. I agree. He is a good choice, and he's an interesting character from history as well, given what he did during the times he was doing it. I mean, it's probably not an exaggeration to say it's probably top 3 at least of the most difficult periods of American history.
Yeah, easily. Yeah.
And he was, and to be able to work through that period and still seek to build consensus as well, because it would have been so easy to just say, well, I'm in charge, I've got the vision, this is what we're doing. But he took a different approach. And I really like that. And particularly how far ago it was in history as well. Like, it's some quite modern leadership principles at work there.
Yeah. It wasn't intuitive at all. It wasn't anybody telling him this is the way you do it. He was definitely ahead of his time. We could use him again.
Yeah. Well, no comment.
Yeah.
I think that's often the side of the really great leaders, though, isn't it? As they are ahead of their time in some respect or other. Yeah, great one. Well, Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Last thing I'll ask you is if any of the listeners would like to learn more about you, about your company, what you guys do, where can they find more information?
Yeah, if they want to learn more about the framework I've talked about, Find and Follow, they can go to findandfollowbook.com and they can pick up the book there. We also have a free course on it. The company, the product, screensteps.com. And if they want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn, just Greg DeVore on LinkedIn. Reach out. I'd love to connect with you.
Lovely. I'll pop all of those links in the show notes and the episode description so people can find it easily as well. Well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you again so much. It's been great talking to you today.
Thank you. It's been fantastic.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Huge thanks again to Greg for his time today. That was a really interesting conversation. I learned loads about knowledge transfer and that tribal knowledge problem in different ways than I expected, actually. So it was an interesting conversation. Also loved hearing all about his career history too. Listener, if you would like to learn more about Screen Steps or the Find and Follow book, I have put the links in the episode description, so take a look there. I do encourage you, as always, to click on it, have a look at the websites, maybe get a copy of that book. I'm sure it would be helpful to you in your own leadership journey. And if you are struggling with that tribal knowledge problem, if you do have knowledge gaps in your own leadership, in your team, or among the people that you manage and lead, and it's something you're struggling with, then do reach out to Greg. You can also visit my website, www.leadernotaboss.com. Sign up to the newsletter. You'll get advance notice of episodes. You'll get regular content about leadership. You will also, by signing up, receive an invite to join the Integrity Leaders online community, specifically built for new leaders struggling with many of the same issues as we've discussed today. And we are still operating a 60-day free trial, so it will cost you nothing to try it out for 2 months. It won't even ask you for payment details. The only thing I will ask you for is your kind input and your honest feedback on the community to help us build it more, to help us improve it, and make sure that it really is something that you need. That's all I have time for today. I hope you'll join me again next week when I'll be having a highly entertaining conversation with the double act that is Alan and Emily Braithwaite of Yellow Tuxedo and the Digital Circus. So we'll be talking all about their fun-loving approach to business, the leadership lessons they've each learned from their careers prior to starting their company together, and some of the entertaining stories that they will share from their own life in business. Looking forward to it. And in the meantime, keep thinking about that tribal knowledge and how you can best capture it, save it, retain it. And as always, be a leader, not a boss.